Welcome to our channel HASHMICLINICS.
Imagine taking like a lump of barbecue charcoal, right? And you crush it down into this really fine gritty powder.
Okay, I'm with you.
And then you dissolve that powder into a boiling vat of industrial drain cleaner.
Oh, wow. Sounds delicious.
Right. Now imagine waiting for that toxic sludge to cool down, bottling it up, and actually drinking it to cure a bad mood or a persistent rash.
Yeah, which is just wild to think about today.
It really is. So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are decoding one of the most intensely bizarre medical texts ever written. We are looking at the historical documentation of a substance called Anthrakokali.
It is genuinely a staggering piece of medical history. The texts you provided detail the physiological action of this concoction.
Yeah, physiological action is putting it mildly.
Exactly. At its chemical core, Anthrakokali is a specific type of anthracite coal dissolved in boiling caustic potash. So we were talking about a base of carbon and sulfur interacting violently with potassium and calcium.
Just a cocktail of extreme chemical.
Right. And to make this even theoretically survivable for a human being to ingest, the texts note that the substance was subjected to a pharmaceutical process called low triturations.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because trituration is a very, clinical word for a process that basically defies modern mathematical logic.
It really does.
It essentially means taking that toxic, insoluble coal sludge and grinding it down with a neutral powder like milk sugar just over and over again to dilute it.
Right, to lessen the toxicity.
Yeah, it's like taking a single drop of extreme hot sauce, dropping it into an Olympic-sized swimming pool, and then claiming the pool water is now perfectly spicy enough to marinate a chicken.
That is the perfect analogy. And it brings us right to the fundamental medical philosophy of the era, which we have to understand before we can even look at the symptoms in these texts.
Yeah, because it wasn't just random.
No, not at all. This isn't just a random medieval potion. These texts belong to the late 18th and 19th century medical framework of homeopathy, which was founded by Samuel Hahnemann. And the entire operating system of this text is built on a Latin phrase, similia similibus curentur. Like cures like.
Like cures like. So the core belief here is that whatever symptoms a massive toxic dose of a substance causes in a healthy person, a highly diluted, triturated dose of that exact same substance will somehow cure in a sick person.
Precisely.
Which explains why we're looking at pages and pages of just horrific physical reactions to drinking coal and drain cleaner. I mean, they weren't trying to poison people, they were trying to map a theoretical cure.
Exactly. They called this mapping process approving.
Approving.
Yeah. So healthy volunteers would ingest these triturations of Anthrakokali and meticulously record every single physical, emotional, and mental symptom they experienced over days and weeks.
That sounds exhausting.
It was. The goal was to build a comprehensive, exhaustive database of the substance's effect on the human organism.
Wait, okay, call it rigorous if you want, but how on earth is it scientific to feed people caustic potash and call the resulting chemical burns a medical proving?
Well, it's a different era of science.
But weren't there doctors at the time looking at this and screaming that they were just documenting textbook poisoning? Because even in the notes provided by Professor Dr. Rifat Hashmi, there is a very telling quote from a prominent historical physician named Herring.
Yes. The Herring quote.
Yeah. He looks at Anthrakokali and calls it, quote, a very absurd combination, proved on many people, but in a very superficial way.
Right.
If the authorities of their own era are calling it absurd and superficial, why did they keep doing it?
What's fascinating here is that the socio-medical landscape of the time was just desperate. Standard medicine in that era involved aggressive bloodletting, blistering, and purging with heavy metals like mercury.
So the bar was basically on the floor.
Exactly. In contrast, the homeopathic physicians believed their extreme dilutions unlocked the spirit-like healing essence of the raw chemicals without the fatal toxicity.
Okay, I see.
So despite Herring's skepticism about this specific coal mixture, the practitioners who documented Anthrakokali applied incredible rigor to their flawed premise. I mean, they cross-referenced everything.
Yeah, looking at the sources, they really did.
The texts show them actively comparing the physiological reactions of Anthrakokali to establish remedies like the carbons, the antimonies, Rus toxicodendron, dulcamara, and ferrum iodatum.
They were really trying to decode the underlying chemical grammar of the human body.
Yes, beautifully put.
And a vocabulary of that chemical grammar starts right on the surface. because Anthrakokali contains caustic potash, which is a strong alkaline historically used to make soap, right?
Really?
Yeah, so its most prominent documented effects naturally erupt on the skin. The texts outline its primary clinical uses for severe skin affections like scabies, prurigo, chronic herpes, and chronic cracks and ulcerations of the nostril.
The mechanism there is fascinating when you actually break down the chemistry. Caustic potash saponifies fats. It literally turns lipids into soap.
Oh, wow.
So when this alkaline substance enters the system, the body's largest organ of elimination, the skin, reacts violently.
That makes total sense.
The documentation notes purulent pimples and papular-like eruptions with a vesicular tendency.
Meaning they're describing raised, fluid-filled blisters.
Exactly. And they track the precise geographical manifestation of this chemical reaction. The eruptions localized intensely on the scrotum, the hands, the tibia, the shoulders, and the soles of the feet.
But right next to that hyper-specific clinical dermatology, the texts drop in a concept that just totally derails the modern mind.
With astrology.
Yes. They state, with the exact same level of medical confidence, that these vesicular eruptions naturally decrease with the full of the moon.
Yes, it's quite the pivot.
And under a category literally labeled planets, Anthrakokali is explicitly associated with Saturn. It is such a wild juxtaposition.
It really is.
It's like reading a modern medical chart that suddenly tells you, hey, your eczema is acting up because Mercury is in retrograde.
I know, it sounds absurd to us.
Yeah.
But in the historical context of natural philosophy, the macrocosm of the universe and the microcosm of the human body were totally inseparable.
Like everything was connected.
Right. The gravitational pull of the moon affecting the tides was seen as analogous to celestial bodies pulling on the humors and fluids of the human body.
Oh, that's actually kind of poetic.
It is. What makes these texts a masterpiece of historical contradiction is how they hold planetary astrology in one hand and profoundly gritty physical reality in the other.
Yeah, they don't hold back on the grit.
Not at all. Just lines away from discussing Saturn, the text specifically notes the patient experiencing perspiration in the evening axilla, the armpits, that is sticky, clammy, and lasting all night.
Sticky, clammy armpit sweat. You really cannot get more grounded in uncomfortable human reality than that.
Definitely not.
And those physical symptoms are really just the beginning, because the illness doesn't stay on the surface. We have to look at the era's concept of how disease travels, right?
Right. The physicians of the time believed that if you suppress a skin condition, the morbid influence migrates inward to attack the vital organs.
So as the Anthrakokali moves through the system, the texts track this terrifying internal journey starting right in the throat.
Yeah, the initial alkaline shock to the mucosal lining. The text notes profound dryness and an internal heat extending all the way down the esophagus to the stomach, which slightly impedes swallowing.
Ouch!
Yeah. The tissue is quite literally reacting to a mild chemical burn, attempting to draw in moisture to neutralize the caustic environment.
And once it hits the stomach, the nervous system completely misfires. The symptoms listed are intense, like retching, cramps, and this wild swing in appetite.
Right, the anorexia.
Yeah. The test describes an initial anorexia, a total loss of appetite driven by nausea, which then suddenly, inexplicably shifts to a sharper, aggressive hunger.
Which is so strange.
And then comes the vomiting. But they aren't just throwing up food. The text specifies vomiting of bile and black mucus.
Which, if you think about it, perfectly mirrors the raw material they ingested.
Because they're consuming dissolved anthracite coal.
Exactly. The black mucus and the subsequent blackish stools are basically the gastrointestinal tract's emergency evacuation protocol.
Just trying to save itself.
Yeah. The stomach and intestines are weeping mucus in a desperate attempt to coat the lining and purge the raw, insoluble minerals from the system.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because it leads to my absolute favorite medical term in this entire text.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
As the abdomen inflates with gas, what the text calls tympanic distension, where the stomach gets tight and hollow like a timpani drum, they document the presence of borborygmi.
Borborygmi, it's a great word.
It is the best word. For you listening, borborygmi is essentially the high-end academic term for aggressive, turbulent stomach rumbling.
Just massive ingestion.
Yes. Imagine an abdomen inflated like a drum, echoing with the massive rolling thunder of a digestive tract in total freefall.
It paints quite a picture. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the dehydration resulting from that systemic purge brings us to a critical inflection point in the text.
Okay, how so?
Well, as the body rapidly loses fluid through vomiting and blackish evacuations, the burden falls entirely on the kidneys. And this is where the historical authors make a medical deduction that is surprisingly brilliant.
Yeah, the text outlines a profound shift in the urinary system, an abundant flow of pale urine without sediment clinical diuresis.
Right.
There is burning in the urethra, itching at the orifice, and occasional retention of urine. And paired with this massive fluid loss is an intense, insatiable, burning thirst that hits the patient just before a feverish sweat breaks out.
And based on those specific observations, the massive fluid output paired with unquenchable thirst, the authors state that Anthrakokali has a place in the treatment of diabetes mellitus.
Wait, so they saw a patient drinking buckets of water and producing massive amounts of pale urine and thought, aha, diabetes.
They did. To appreciate how perceptive this is, you have to realize that diabetes mellitus translates from its Greek and Latin roots to mean a siphoning of sweet water.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Centuries before we could run an A1C blood test to check insulin resistance, the primary diagnostic markers for diabetes were exactly what these physicians were documenting: severe diuresis and severe thirst.
So let's connect the dots here for a second. They induced a localized chemical trauma using a bizarre mixture of coal and lye.
Right.
That trauma triggered a massive dehydration response, and the physicians were paying such close, unbiased attention to the resulting symptom cluster that they accurately recognized the mirror image of a very real, very serious metabolic disease.
Exactly.
They recognized the shadow of diabetes in the chaos of chemical poisoning.
It completely validates their observational skills.
Mm.
You might fundamentally reject the safety of their provings, and you can certainly question the planetary astrology, but you really cannot question their clinical eye. They understood disease patterns deeply.
But the deep dive gets so much darker as the proving continues. We've tracked the substance from the skin, down the throat, through the stomach, and into the kidneys. But it doesn't stop there. The text meticulously explores how this profound, sustained physical toll inevitably breaks down the deepest structural foundations of the body. The list of deep tissue ailments reads like a horror novel.
It really does. We are looking at a portrait of total systemic exhaustion. The toxic burden of heavy metals and the caustic base ultimately strips the body of its cellular regenerative capacity.
The text documents caries and necrosis of the bones. They are casually recording the death and decay of bone tissue.
It's brutal.
They list conditions ranging from chronic rheumatism to sudden, complete hair loss or alopecia. The glands swell painfully, and the patient develops internal dropsy, which is profound, life-threatening internal fluid retention.
Yeah, and the bone necrosis is particularly telling. It requires a severe disruption of blood supply to the bone marrow, which is usually seen in advanced stages of extreme malnutrition or heavy metal poisoning.
So the body is just giving up.
Basically, the proving has pushed the volunteers' bodies past the point of basic defense mechanisms and into structural collapse.
And it wreaks absolute havoc on the reproductive systems. For men, the text notes frequent painful erections, known as priapism. For women, catamenia, the menstrual cycle extending far beyond the usual period.
The body's regulatory hormones are completely derailed.
Even their basal temperature regulation shatters. They endure febrile shivering, alternating with intense heat, which only disappears when a clammy sweat breaks out, leaving the skin continually moist and the pulse racing out of control.
And we cannot ignore the psychological toll this structural collapse takes on the human mind.
No, definitely not.
Because the separation of mind and body is a relatively modern failing, These historical texts always track the emotional landscape right alongside the physical one.
They certainly did. Under the section literally titled Mind, they paint an incredibly bleak picture. The patient is described as morose, sulky, and exhibiting constant ill humor.
Yeah.
The text specifically highlights a profound sadness during the chill of their fevers. They suffer from severe sleeplessness, driven by endless agitation and that excited, racing pulse.
It's agonizing.
So, what does this all mean? Are we reading a list of cures, or just the tragic diary of a patient slowly being poisoned by caustic potash? If we're looking at decaying bones, profound depression, and a failing digestive tract, how did anyone look at this list of horrors and see a medicine cabinet?
This raises an important question, and you have to return to that foundational philosophy we discussed at the beginning, similio similibus currentur. The poison is the specific remedy.
Right, like cures like.
Exactly. The philosophy dictated that Anthrakokali itself wasn't a universal tonic for health. It was a highly specialized key designed for a very specific lock.
Okay.
If a patient walked into a 19th century clinic, naturally suffering from bone necrosis, accompanied by sticky axilla sweat, intense thirst, and a morose, sulky disposition.
That very specific combo.
Right. The physician would consult this exact text. They would see that Anthrakokali produced that exact bizarre combination of symptoms in a healthy person.
Oh, wow.
Therefore, the triturated, highly diluted form of Anthrakokali was the divine, mathematically perfect cure for that sick person.
So the proving diary of a healthy person being poisoned literally serves as the clinical manual for the sick person seeking a cure.
Precisely.
That is why they documented the horror with such impassive, obsessive detail. They weren't just watching people suffer, they believed they were forging new tools to save lives.
Exactly. Every agonizing symptom they cataloged was viewed as a victory. It was a new weapon in their medical arsenal against diseases that, at the time, were considered a complete death sentence.
Which really brings us full circle. For you listening, we have taken a massive, strange journey today.
We really have.
We started with a lump of barbecue coal and a vat of boiling lye. We navigated the concept of cures, rode the turbulent waves of borborygmi and black mucus, marveled at the clinical brilliance of identifying the markers of diabetes, and ended deep in the tragic decay of the bones and the sadness of the mind.
It is a dense, almost overwhelming piece of medical literature, but engaging with it is so vital.
It truly is. Because while Anthrakokali might seem like nothing more than toxic sludge wrapped in Saturnian astrology to us today, studying these texts helps us appreciate something profound about the human drive to heal.
Right. The dedication is undeniable.
It shows us how desperately, how bravely, and how meticulously our ancestors tried to map the dark wilderness of disease. They relied on raw observation and an unwavering, almost stubborn belief that nature held a cure for every ailment.
Even if they had to look for the most absurd combinations of coal and drain cleaner.
Exactly. And I think that leaves us with one final fascinating layer to all of this, something for you to ponder long after this deep dive is over.
Oh, definitely. Because it completely reframes how you might view medical history.
If we look back at the precise, confident documentation of anthracite coal dissolved in boiling lye as a perfect cure for bone decay and bad moods.
Right, a very absurd combination.
Yeah. What perfectly normal, widely accepted medical treatments that you use today will medical historians of the year 2126 look back on and describe as a very absurd combination?
Professor Dr. Rafat Hashmi is a distinguished homeopathic physician, educator, and researcher with over 4 decades of clinical and teaching experience. He is widely respected for his deep command of materia medica, repertory, and constitutional prescribing, combined with a practical, patient-centered approach. Dr. Hashmi has dedicated his career to training generations of homeopathic doctors, blending classical principles with modern clinical insight. He is also known for his innovative work in digital homeopathy, developing educational content, clinical tools, and AI-assisted systems to enhance remedy selection and case analysis. With a strong commitment to ethical practice and lifelong learning, Professor Dr. Rafat Hashmi continues to guide, inspire, and elevate the standards of homeopathic education and patient care.